The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as guard James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic and straightened his tall black bearskin hat. At 28 years old, James had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 6 years, and the routine had become second nature to him. Stand perfectly still, eyes forward, never break character. These were the golden rules that every guard lived by. The tourists were already gathering, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous guards who never moved, never smiled, and never acknowledged the crowd. James had seen it all before, people making funny faces, telling jokes, even dancing in front of him, all trying to get some kind of reaction. He had mastered the art of becoming a living statue, a skill that required incredible discipline and focus. But this Tuesday morning felt different somehow. As James took his position outside the palace gates, he noticed an unusual commotion in the crowd. Unlike the typical tourists snapping photos and chatting excitedly, there was a small group of people who seemed distressed. A young mother was kneeling on the pavement, frantically searching through her handbag while tears streamed down her face. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She wore a simple blue dress and comfortable walking shoes, clearly a tourist who had been exploring London on foot. Beside her stood a little girl, no more than 7 years old, with curly blonde hair and bright green eyes that were now filled with confusion and growing worry. "Mummy, what's wrong?" the child asked, tugging at her mother's dress. "Why are you crying?" The mother, Sarah Henderson from Manchester, continued searching desperately through her bag, pulling out items one by one, tissues, a water bottle, tourist brochures, her phone, keys, but not finding what she was looking for. Her movements became more frantic with each passing second, and her breathing grew shallow and rapid. James watched from the corner of his eye, maintaining his rigid posture but becoming increasingly aware that this wasn't a typical tourist situation. The crowd around the distressed woman was growing larger, but instead of helping, most people were simply staring or taking photos, treating the scene as part of the London tourist experience. "Has anyone seen a small brown teddy bear?" Sarah called out to the crowd, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please, my daughter Emily's bear. It must have fallen somewhere around here. It's very important." Emily, hearing her mother's desperate plea, began to understand the gravity of the situation. Her bottom lip started to tremble, and her eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Buttons?" she whispered. "Where's Mr. Buttons, Mummy?" The teddy bear, James learned from overhearing the conversation, wasn't just any ordinary toy. Mr. Buttons had been Emily's constant companion since she was a baby. More importantly, it had belonged to her father, who had passed away in a car accident 2 years earlier. The bear was one of the few tangible connections Emily had to her dad, and losing it would be devastating for both mother and daughter. Sarah had brought Emily to London for a special birthday trip. Emily's 8th birthday was the following day, and this vacation was meant to be a celebration of how far they had come in healing from their loss. They had planned to visit all the famous landmarks, take photos to show Emily's grandparents back home, and create new happy memories together. The morning had started perfectly. They had enjoyed breakfast at their small hotel near Victoria Station, then taken the tube to Green Park before walking to Buckingham Palace. Emily had been so excited to see the famous Red Guards, chattering non-stop about whether they were real people or just statues. She had clutched Mr. Buttons tightly as they walked, but somewhere in the excitement of seeing the palace, the bear had slipped from her small hands. Now, as the reality of the loss set in, Emily's quiet whimpers turned into full sobs. "I want Mr. Buttons," she cried. "Daddy gave him to me. He keeps the bad dreams away." James felt his heart clench as he heard these words. Despite years of training to remain emotionally detached during his duties, he found himself deeply moved by the little girl's distress. He could see other tourists starting to help search, checking under benches and in flower beds, but the area around Buckingham Palace was vast, and a small brown teddy bear could be anywhere. The crowd was growing, restless. Some tourists were becoming impatient, wanting to take their photos with the guards and move on to their next destination. Others were genuinely trying to help, but were running out of places to look. The palace security was keeping a watchful eye on the situation, but they too seemed unsure of how to proceed. As minutes passed, Sarah's hope began to fade. She pulled Emily close, trying to comfort her daughter while fighting back her own tears. This trip was supposed to be about healing and moving forward, but instead, it was turning into another painful reminder of loss. The symbolic significance of losing her father's bear felt like losing a piece of him all over again. James continued to stand at attention, but internally, he was wrestling with a decision that would go against everything he had been taught about: his role as a Queen's Guard. The rules were clear, the expectations absolute. But sometimes, he thought, rules needed to be broken for something more important: human compassion. James Mitchell had never been one to break rules. Growing up in a military family in Yorkshire, discipline and following orders were values instilled in him from childhood. His father had served in the Royal Navy for 25 years, and his grandfather had been a soldier in World War II. The Mitchell family motto was simple: duty first, personal feelings second. When James joined the Queen's Guard, he embraced this philosophy completely. During his training, he had learned about the history and prestige of his role. The Queen's Guard wasn't just about standing still and looking impressive. They were highly trained soldiers responsible for protecting the royal family and maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. Every movement, every breath, every moment on duty was a representation of centuries of British military tradition. But as he watched Emily Henderson's small shoulders shake with sobs, something deep inside James began to stir. He thought about his own niece, Lucy, who was about Emily's age. Lucy had a special stuffed elephant that she carried everywhere, and James knew that if she ever lost it, she would be absolutely heartbroken. The difference was that Lucy's elephant was just a comfort object. Emily's teddy bear was a connection to her deceased father. The crowd around Sarah and Emily was thinning out. Some tourists had given up the search and moved on to take their photos. Others had tried to help, but were now checking their watches and consulting their guidebooks, eager to stick to their packed London itineraries. A few kind-hearted strangers remained, still searching under benches and asking passers-by if they had seen a small brown teddy bear. An elderly gentleman with a walking stick approached Sarah. "I'm so sorry, dear," he said gently. "My wife and I have looked everywhere we can think of. Have you tried asking the police officers?" He pointed toward 2 Metropolitan police officers who were stationed near the palace gates. Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded. "Yes, I spoke to them already. They said they'll keep an eye out, but—" Her voice trailed off. They both knew the chances of finding one small toy in such a busy area were slim. Emily had stopped crying but was now eerily quiet, staring at the ground with a blank expression that worried her mother more than the tears had. This was the same look Emily had worn for months after her father's funeral, a look of resignation that no 7-year-old should ever have to display. James continued to observe the scene while maintaining his ceremonial position. He noticed details that others might have missed. He saw how Sarah kept glancing at her phone, probably checking the time and calculating how much longer they could spend searching before they needed to head to their next planned activity. He noticed how Emily's fingers kept reaching for something that wasn't there, the automatic gesture of a child accustomed to holding on to her security object. More importantly, James began to retrace the family's likely path in his mind. He had been standing at his post when they arrived, and he remembered seeing them approach from the direction of St. James's Park. Emily had been skipping alongside her mother, and yes, he distinctly remembered seeing a flash of brown clutched in the little girl's arms. The Queen's Guards were trained to be observant. They needed to notice potential threats, suspicious behavior, and anything out of the ordinary. This training meant that James often unconsciously catalogued details about the people and events around him, even when he appeared to be staring straight ahead without seeing anything. As he mentally retraced Emily's movements, James realized something that made his pulse quicken. About 20 minutes earlier, just before Sarah had discovered the bear was missing, there had been a small incident. A group of teenagers had been running through the courtyard, laughing and chasing each other as part of some sort of social media challenge. They had bumped into several tourists, including a mother and daughter who matched Sarah and Emily's description. The collision had been brief and seemingly harmless, just teenagers being careless in a crowded public space. But now James wondered if that moment might have been when Mr. Buttons fell from Emily's grasp. If he was right, the bear wouldn't be near the palace gates where everyone was searching. It would be somewhere along the path where the teenagers had been running. James felt a growing sense of urgency. He knew that tourists typically didn't spend very long at any single location. Sarah and Emily would probably give up their search soon and continue with their day, potentially leaving London without ever recovering this precious connection to Emily's father. The internal struggle intensified. On one side was everything James had been taught about his duty, his role, and the expectations placed upon him as a member of the Queen's Guard. Guards simply did not break character. They did not leave their posts. They did not interact with tourists beyond the most basic professional requirements. On the other side was a grieving child who was about to lose something irreplaceable, and a mother who was trying her best to hold her family together in the face of unimaginable loss. James thought about his own family, his own values, and what his grandfather might have done in this situation. His grandfather had always said that sometimes the most important battles weren't the ones fought with weapons, but the ones fought with acts of human kindness. The moment of decision was approaching. Sarah was beginning to pack up her belongings, clearly preparing to leave. She knelt down next to Emily and spoke softly to her daughter, probably explaining that they had tried their best but needed to continue with their day. Emily nodded numbly, the resignation in her eyes growing deeper. James took a deep breath and made a choice that would change everything. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to move. It started with just a slight shift in his posture, then a small step forward. The tourists nearest to him gasped and started pointing, amazed to see one of the famously motionless guards actually moving. But James wasn't moving for their entertainment or amazement. He was moving for a little girl who needed help, and sometimes, he realized being a true protector meant protecting more than just buildings and ceremonies. Sometimes it meant protecting hope itself. The moment James Mitchell took his first step away from his ceremonial position, the atmosphere around Buckingham Palace changed completely. Gasps rippled through the crowd of tourists who had gathered to see the famous immovable guards. Phones and cameras swung in his direction as people realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Oh my goodness, he's actually moving," exclaimed an American tourist, frantically trying to start recording on her phone. "Is this part of some special ceremony?" asked a confused German visitor to his companion. James heard the murmurs and excitement building around him, but he kept his focus on Sarah and Emily Henderson. The little girl looked up at the approaching red-coated figure with wide, startled eyes. She had probably never imagined that the statue-like guards were real people who could actually walk and talk. Sarah instinctively pulled Emily closer, unsure what was happening. In her distressed state, her first thought was that perhaps they had somehow broken a rule or caused trouble by searching for the teddy bear in the palace area. Her face showed a mixture of confusion and worry. James stopped a few feet away from them and, in a moment that would be captured by dozens of cameras and shared across social media within hours, he did something no one expected. He knelt down to Emily's eye level, bringing his imposing 6-foot frame down to meet the small, sad girl face to face. "Hello there, little miss," James said in his warm Yorkshire accent, his voice gentle despite years of military training. "I'm James. I couldn't help but notice that you've lost something very important." Emily stared at him with amazement, her mouth slightly open. The sight of this tall, official-looking guard with his red uniform and enormous black hat, speaking directly to her, was like something from a fairy tale. For a moment, she forgot about her sadness and was simply captivated by the magic of the moment. Sarah found her voice first. "I'm so sorry if we've caused any disruption," she began nervously. "We were just looking for my daughter's teddy bear, and we'll move along now if we're in the way." James shook his head and smiled reassuringly. "You haven't caused any trouble at all, ma'am. In fact, I think I might be able to help you find what you're looking for." He turned his attention back to Emily. "This teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, is it? He's very special to you, isn't he?" Emily nodded, finding her voice in a whisper. He was my daddy's when he was little. Daddy's in heaven now, and Mr. Buttons helps me not be scared at night." The simple, innocent explanation hit James harder than he had expected. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, but their excited chatter was beginning to quiet as people realized this wasn't a performance or ceremony. This was something real and meaningful happening before their eyes. "Well then," James said, "we absolutely must find Mr. Buttons. A bear with such an important job can't be allowed to go missing." He stood up and looked around thoughtfully. "Emily, I want you to think carefully. When was the last time you remember holding Mr. Buttons?" Emily scrunched up her face in concentration. "We were walking from the park and I was carrying him. Then those big boys were running and laughing really loud and one of them bumped into me a little bit." James nodded knowingly. "I remember those boys. They were running right through here about 20 minutes ago, weren't they?" He pointed toward a path that led away from the palace gates. "If Mr. Buttons fell during that bump, he wouldn't be here where everyone's been looking. He'd be over there along the path where you were walking." Hope began to creep back into Sarah's expression. "Do you really think so?" "I think it's very possible," James replied. Then, in a decision that would later prompt discussions at the highest levels of palace protocol, he added, "And I think we should go look for him right now." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the Queen's Guard began walking away from his post, accompanied by a mother and daughter who had clearly captured his heart. Other guards remained at their positions, maintaining their stoic expressions, but James could sense their curiosity about his unprecedented actions. As they walked along the path James had identified, he began to understand more about Sarah and Emily's story. Sarah explained how they had traveled down from Manchester for Emily's birthday, how this was their first real vacation since Emily's father had died, and how much the trip meant to both of them. David, Emily's father, he would have loved seeing her reaction to London, Sarah said softly as they searched behind bushes and benches. He was always planning these elaborate adventures for her. Nothing was ever too much trouble if it made Emily smile. James found himself thinking about legacy and what it meant to honor someone's memory. Here was a father who had clearly prioritized his daughter's happiness above all else, and now his wife was trying to continue that tradition despite her own grief. The teddy bear represented more than just comfort. It was a tangible link to a father's love. "What was your daddy like?" James asked Emily as they continued their search. Emily's face brightened for the first time that day. "He was really tall, like you, and he used to read me stories every night. He did different voices for all the characters, and Mr. Buttons would sit on his lap and listen too. Daddy said Mr. Buttons was the best audience because he never interrupted." The search was more systematic now, with James using his military training to grid the area and check locations that casual searchers might have missed. Several tourists had joined them, inspired by the guards' compassion and wanting to help reunite Emily with her precious bear. After 15 minutes of careful searching, just as James was beginning to worry that his theory might be wrong, Emily suddenly called out from near a decorative hedge, "I think I see something brown." Everyone rushed over to where she was pointing. There, partially hidden under some fallen leaves near the base of the hedge, was a small brown teddy bear with button eyes and a slightly worn red ribbon around its neck. "Mr. Buttons!" Emily shrieked with joy, reaching down to scoop up her beloved companion. She hugged the bear tightly to her chest, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Sarah's relief was overwhelming. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Not tears of distress this time, but tears of gratitude and joy. When she looked up at James, her eyes were shining with the emotion that went far beyond simple thankfulness. The moment Emily was reunited with Mr. Buttons transformed the entire scene around Buckingham Palace. What had started as a distressing search for a lost toy had become something much more profound, a demonstration of human kindness that touched everyone who witnessed it. Emily clutched her teddy bear tightly, examining him carefully to make sure he was unharmed. "Mr. Buttons, I was so scared I lost you forever," she whispered to the bear as if he could understand every word. "This nice guard man helped find you. His name is James." The crowd that had gathered to watch the unusual scene broke into spontaneous applause. Tourists from all over the world, Americans, Germans, Japanese visitors, families from across Britain, found themselves united in celebrating this small but significant victory. Many people were recording the moment on their phones, but instead of the usual tourist snapshots, these videos captured something genuinely heartwarming. Sarah wiped away her tears and looked at James with an expression of profound gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to us. That bear isn't just a toy. It's our connection to Emily's father. Losing it would have been devastating." James felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced during his years of ceremonial duty. This was different from the satisfaction of completing military exercises or the pride of representing his country. This was the simple joy that comes from helping another human being in a moment of genuine need. "There's no need to thank me," James replied sincerely. "I'm just glad we found him. Mr. Buttons looks like he's been on quite an adventure today." Emily giggled, the first time she had laughed since arriving at the palace. "Mr. Buttons likes adventures, but he likes being with me more." She looked up at James with curious eyes. "Are you really a soldier? Do you protect the Queen?" "I am a soldier, and yes, part of my job is to help protect the royal family," James explained. "But sometimes protecting people means helping little girls find their teddy bears too." An elderly woman in the crowd stepped forward. She had been watching the entire scene unfold and was visibly moved by what she had witnessed. "Young man," she said to James, "in all my 78 years I've never seen anything quite like this. You've restored my faith in human decency." Her comment seemed to speak for many in the crowd. People began approaching James not for photos or autographs, but simply to express their appreciation for what he had done. A young father holding his toddler son said, "I hope my boy grows up to be as kind as you." A teenage girl told him, "This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in real life." But perhaps the most meaningful reaction came from Emily herself. As the excitement of finding Mr. Buttons began to settle, she walked up to James and tugged gently on his red tunic. When he knelt down to her level again, she reached up and gave him a hug that melted the hearts of everyone watching. "Thank you for helping me find my daddy's bear," she whispered in his ear. "I think Daddy would like you very much." James felt his eyes water slightly at her words. Throughout his military career, he had received commendations, medals, and formal recognition for his service. But nothing had ever meant as much to him as this simple statement from a 7-year-old girl. As the crowd began to disperse and normal tourist activities resumed, James realized he needed to address the practical reality of his situation. He had abandoned his post, broken protocol, and acted completely outside his authority as a member of the Queen's Guard. There would certainly be consequences to face. Sarah seemed to sense his concern. "Will you get in trouble for helping us?" she asked worriedly. "I would hate to think that your kindness might cause problems for you." James considered the question honestly. His commanding officers would need to be informed about what had happened. There would be questions, reports, and likely some form of disciplinary action. The Queen's Guard simply did not leave their posts during ceremonial duties, regardless of the circumstances. "I might face some questions about my actions," James admitted, "but I want you to know that I don't regret helping you for even a second. Some things are more important than following rules exactly as they're written." Word of the incident was already spreading beyond the immediate crowd. Tourist guides were sharing the story with their groups, and the videos being posted on social media were beginning to gain attention. Within hours, clips of James leaving his post to help search for Emily's teddy bear would be viewed by millions of people around the world. But at that moment, none of that mattered to James. What mattered was seeing Emily's smile return, seeing Sarah's relief, and knowing that he had made a difference in the lives of two people who needed help. He thought about his grandfather's words about the battles worth fighting, and he knew he had chosen correctly. As James prepared to return to his duties, Emily ran up to him one more time. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked hopefully. "It's my birthday tomorrow, and Mummy says we might come back to see the palace again." "I work different days at different times," James explained gently. "But even if I'm not here, there will always be guards here who care about keeping people safe and happy." Emily nodded seriously, as if she understood something profound about duty and service. "If I see another guard tomorrow, I'll tell them that James is the best guard in the whole world." With Mr. Buttons safely back in her arms and her faith and kindness restored, Emily Henderson skipped alongside her mother as they continued their London adventure. Behind them, James Mitchell returned to his post, knowing that he had just experienced one of the most important moments of his life. The other guards welcomed him back with subtle nods and expressions that conveyed both curiosity and respect. Word would eventually reach their superiors, but for now, James simply resumed his position and returned to his duties, forever changed by a little girl's gratitude and a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons. By evening, the story of James Mitchell's compassionate act had taken on a life of its own. The videos captured by tourists at Buckingham Palace were spreading across social media platforms at an incredible rate. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with clips showing the moment a Queen's Guard broke protocol to help a little girl find her teddy bear. The hashtags #Royal Guard Hero and Mr. Buttons Found began trending worldwide. News outlets picked up the story, and within hours major broadcasters were running segments about the guard who chose kindness over rules. The BBC, CNN, Sky News, and international media organizations were all covering what they called the most heartwarming moment of the year. Amsai was completely unaware of this growing attention as he completed his shift and returned to his quarters at Wellington Barracks. He had spent the afternoon reflecting on his decision and preparing for what he expected would be a difficult conversation with his superior officers. Military discipline was strict, and leaving one's post during ceremonial duties was a serious breach of protocol. At 6:30 p.m., James received a message to report to Major Williams's office immediately. Major Patricia Williams was his commanding officer, a stern woman in her 50s with 30 years of military service. She was known for her fairness, but also for her unwavering commitment to maintaining the high standards expected of the Queen's Guard. When James knocked on her office door, he found Major Williams sitting behind her desk with several printed pages and her laptop open. Her expression was unreadable, which made James even more nervous about the conversation that was about to unfold. "Guardsman Mitchell," she began formally, "please take a seat. We need to discuss the events of this morning." James sat down, maintaining his military posture despite his apprehension. "Yes, ma'am. I understand that my actions were outside standard protocol, and I'm prepared to accept full responsibility." Major Williams studied him for a moment before speaking. "James, in the past 6 hours, this office has received 47 phone calls, 32 emails, and I've had to field questions from 3 different news organizations. The Palace Press Office is handling media inquiries, and even the Ministry of Defense has been contacted about the story." James felt his stomach sink. The situation was far worse than he had imagined. "I'm truly sorry, ma'am. I never intended to cause such a disruption." To his surprise, Major Williams' stern expression softened slightly. "James, do you know what all these calls and messages have been about?" "Complaints about my conduct, I assume," James replied quietly. Major Williams turned her laptop screen toward him. "Actually, quite the opposite. Every single communication we've received has been praise for your actions. People from around the world are calling you a hero. The palace has received hundreds of positive messages about the kindness shown by one of their guards." She clicked through several browser tabs, showing James the extent of the story's reach. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a news headline that read, "Queen's Guard proves that compassion is the highest form of service." Another headline proclaimed, "Royal Guard's act of kindness restores faith in humanity." James stared at the screen in disbelief. He had expected disciplinary action, not international praise. "I don't understand, ma'am. I abandoned my post. I broke protocol." Major Williams leaned back in her chair. "Yes, you did break protocol. Under normal circumstances, that would result in formal disciplinary measures. But these weren't normal circumstances, were they?" She pulled up one of the videos on her screen. "Tell me what you see when you watch this." James watched himself kneeling down to speak with Emily, saw the hope return to her face, witnessed the joy when Mr. Buttons was found. But more than that, he saw something he hadn't noticed in the moment: the profound impact his actions had on everyone around them. "I see a little girl who needed help," James said simply. "I see a soldier who understood that sometimes the highest form of service is serving humanity itself," Major Williams replied. "James, the Queen's Guard exists to protect and serve. Yes, that usually means following specific protocols and maintaining ceremonial traditions. But at its heart, our role is about protecting what matters most. And sometimes what matters most is a child's connection to her deceased father. She showed him more messages that had poured in throughout the day. Letters from parents thanking him for showing their children what true kindness looked like. Messages from military families expressing pride in having such a compassionate representative. Even correspondence from other countries praising the British military for having soldiers who embodied both discipline and humanity. The palace has also been in touch, Major Williams continued. While they cannot officially endorse breaking protocol, they have expressed appreciation for the positive way this incident has reflected on both the military and the royal family. Your actions showed the world that behind the uniforms and traditions are real people who care about others. James felt overwhelmed by this unexpected turn of events. What happens now, ma'am? Major Williams smiled, something James had rarely seen her do. Now you return to your duties with a better understanding of what it truly means to serve. However, I want you to know that this incident will be noted in your file as an example of exceptional judgment and compassion under unique circumstances. She paused and looked directly at him. James, military discipline is essential, and protocols exist for good reasons. But a soldier who cannot recognize when humanity trumps regulations is not the kind of soldier we want representing the crown. You showed wisdom beyond your years today. As James left Major Williams's office, he felt a mixture of relief, pride, and humility. He had been prepared for punishment, but instead had received validation for following his conscience. More importantly, he had learned something valuable about the true nature of service and duty. That evening, back in his quarters, James allowed himself to look at some of the social media posts about the day's events. The videos had been viewed millions of times, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive. People were sharing their own stories about acts of kindness, about the importance of helping children, and about the power of choosing compassion over rigid rule following. But the message that meant the most to him was a simple post from Sarah Henderson on Facebook. Today, my daughter Emily and I learned that heroes really do exist. Thank you, James Mitchell, for showing us that kindness is never out of place, even in the most formal settings.
Emily keeps telling everyone she meets about the brave guard who helped find
Mr. Buttons. You've given us a memory we'll treasure forever. James realized that this single day had changed not only his understanding of his role as a guard, but his understanding of his role as a human being. Sometimes the most important missions were the ones that weren't in any manual or protocol guide. 3 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, James Mitchell's life had settled into a new rhythm. Though the impact of that Tuesday morning continued to ripple outward in ways he never could have imagined. The story of the guard who helped find Mr. Buttons had become more than just a viral moment. It had sparked conversations about compassion, duty, and the importance of human connection in an increasingly digital world. James had received thousands of letters from around the globe. Children drew him pictures of teddy bears and guards in red uniforms. Parents shared stories of how they had used his example to teach their children about kindness. Military families wrote to express their pride in having such a compassionate representative in uniform. The letters were stored in 3 large boxes in his quarters, each one a reminder of how a single moment of choosing kindness had touched lives worldwide. The most meaningful correspondence, however, came regularly from Manchester. Sarah Henderson had become something of a family friend, sending James updates about Emily's life and their ongoing healing journey. Emily, now 8 years old, had written him several letters in her careful handwriting, often including drawings of Mr. Buttons and updates about her adventures with the teddy bear. In her most recent letter, Emily had written, "Dear James, Mr. Buttons and I went to the seaside last weekend. I told him about you and how you helped us find each other. Mummy says you are a real-life superhero, but I think you're even better because superheroes in movies aren't real. You are real and you helped us when we really needed it. Love, Emily and Mr. Buttons." The incident had also brought unexpected changes to James's military career. He had been selected for several special assignments, including educational visits to schools where he spoke to children about values, service, and the importance of helping others. These visits had become some of his most rewarding duties, as he watched young faces light up when he told them that anyone could be a hero, simply by being kind to others. During one school visit in London, a young boy had raised his hand and asked, Mr. James, what if helping someone means you might get in trouble? James had thought carefully before answering. Sometimes doing the right thing does involve risk, he had explained. But I've learned that the regret of not helping someone who needs you is much worse than any trouble you might face for trying to help. The most important question isn't whether you might get in trouble. It's whether you can live with yourself if you don't try to help. The royal family had also taken note of the incident, though official protocol prevented them from making public statements about individual guards. However, through proper channels, James had been informed that his actions were viewed favorably at the highest levels. The message conveyed was that the monarchy valued guards who understood that protecting the crown included protecting the values it represented: compassion, service, and care for all subjects. The media attention had gradually faded as news cycles moved on to other stories, but the impact remained. James noticed changes in how tourists interacted with the guards. While maintaining appropriate respect for their duties, visitors seemed to see them more as human beings rather than tourist attractions. Children would wave more enthusiastically, and parents would use the guards as examples when teaching their children about service and dedication. More significantly, the incident had sparked policy discussions within the military about balancing protocol with humanitarian concerns. While the fundamental expectations of duty and discipline remained unchanged, there was now greater recognition that exceptional circumstances might call for exceptional responses. James's case had become a teaching example in military academies about the importance of judgment and character alongside obedience. On a personal level, James found that the experience had deepened his connection to his role. Rather than feeling confined by the rigid expectations of ceremonial duty, he now understood his position as part of a larger tapestry of service that extended beyond palace walls. Every day he stood guard, he carried with him the knowledge that his actions could matter to real people in real ways. 6 months after the original incident, James received an invitation that surprised him completely. Sarah Henderson had written to ask if he would be willing to attend Emily's 9th birthday party in Manchester. "Emily talks about you constantly," Sarah had written. "She considers you a dear friend, and having you at her party would mean the world to her. I know it's a lot to ask, but if you have any leave time available, we would be honored to have you join us." James requested leave and traveled to Manchester on a crisp autumn Saturday. When he arrived at the Henderson home, a modest semi-detached house with a small garden, Emily answered the door clutching Mr. Buttons and wearing the biggest smile he had ever seen. "James, you came, Mr. Buttons, look who's here," she exclaimed, lifting the teddy bear up as if introducing him to an old friend. The party was small and intimate, just family, a few school friends and James. But the warmth and acceptance he felt from this group of people who barely knew him was overwhelming. Sarah's parents, Emily's grandparents, treated him like family. Emily's school friends were fascinated to meet a real Queen's Guard. But more than that, they were impressed to meet someone their friend considered a hero. During the party, as James watched Emily playing with her friends in the garden, Mr. Buttons never far from her side, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A single decision to help a child in distress had led to a friendship that enriched his life immeasurably. Later that afternoon, as the party wound down and other guests departed, Emily approached James with a carefully wrapped present. "This is for you," she said shyly. "Mummy helped me pick it out, but I chose it myself." Inside the wrapping was a small photo frame containing a picture that Sarah had taken on Emily's birthday the year before, Emily's 8th birthday, which they had celebrated quietly, just the two of them, still deep in grief over David's absence. But Sarah had written a note on the back. "Before we met you, Emily's birthdays were sad reminders of what we had lost. Now they're celebrations of what we found: hope, friendship, and the knowledge that good people still exist in the world. Thank you for giving us back our joy." As James prepared to return to London, Emily hugged him tightly. "Will you always be my friend?" she asked. "Always," James promised. "No matter where I am or what I'm doing, you and Mr. Buttons will always have a friend in me." The train journey back to London gave James time to reflect on how profoundly his life had changed. He had joined the military to serve his country, to uphold traditions, and to be part of something larger than himself. He had found all of that, but he had also discovered something unexpected: that the greatest service often came in the smallest moments. in the choice to see beyond duty to humanity itself. When James returned to his duties at Buckingham Palace the following Monday, he took his position with renewed purpose. Tourists still gathered, cameras still clicked, and the ceremonial responsibilities remained unchanged. But now James understood that being a guardian meant more than protecting buildings or following protocols. It meant being ready to protect what mattered most: hope, kindness, and the belief that in a world that could sometimes seem cold and indifferent, there were still people willing to help a little girl find her teddy bear. As he stood at attention in his red tunic and bearskin hat, James carried with him the knowledge that somewhere in Manchester, a 9-year-old girl was getting ready for school, probably telling Mr. Buttons about their wonderful birthday party and their special friend James, who proved that heroes were real. And in that knowledge, James found a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to serve.